After a night with his mistress, he found his pregnant wife's ring and a goodbye note on the bed. The Los Angeles skyline glittered like scattered diamonds beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of the downtown penthouse. Adam Collins, 35, stood with a crystal glass of Bordeaux in his hand, his tailored shirt slightly wrinkled from the evening's activities. The executive who had built his reputation on control and precision was celebrating what he believed to be another perfect crime against his marriage. Vanessa Moore emerged from the bathroom, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of city lights. At 27, she possessed the kind of calculated beauty that opened doors in Los Angeles: angular cheekbones, perfectly styled auburn hair, and eyes that always seemed to be measuring the value of everything around her. She moved with the confidence of someone who had learned early that relationships were just another form of investment. "You're overthinking again," she said, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. Her voice carried the slight rasp of expensive cigarettes and whispered promises. "Lydia doesn't suspect anything. Pregnant women are distracted." Adam turned in her embrace, his dark eyes reflecting the ambient light. 8 months along, and she still waits up for me sometimes. Like tonight. He took another sip of wine, the guilt sliding off him as easily as water off glass. "I told her I had client meetings. Emergency acquisitions." Vanessa laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Beautiful, but hollow. Poor little wife playing house while her husband plays with fire. She traced a finger along his jawline. "Some women are built for the kitchen. Others," she gestured to the luxury surrounding them, "are built for this." 25 miles away in the modest but well-kept house in Pasadena, Lydia Collins sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting on her swollen belly. At 31, she had the kind of natural beauty that came from kindness rather than calculation. Warm brown eyes, honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and a smile that had grown increasingly rare over the past 6 months. The anniversary dinner she had prepared sat cold on the table. Chicken marsala, his favorite. Homemade bread. A small chocolate cake with "Happy 5th Anniversary" written in careful script across the top. The candles had burned down to stumps hours ago, leaving only the overhead light to illuminate her solitude. Her phone showed 11:47 p.m. No missed calls, no texts. She had stopped calling him after the third time it went straight to voicemail. Each unanswered ring had felt like another small death, another piece of evidence in a case she wasn't ready to prosecute. But the baby moved restlessly inside her, as if sensing her distress, and she placed both hands over her stomach. "He's just busy, little one," she whispered, though the words tasted like ash. "Daddy's always busy." But even as she spoke, Lydia knew something fundamental had shifted. The excuses had become too frequent, too elaborate. The late nights had stretched into early mornings. The man who once called her from business trips just to hear her voice now barely looked up from his phone during dinner. Back in the penthouse, Adam was lost in Vanessa's calculated seduction. She had poured herself a glass of wine and was painting a picture of their future together. Trips to Europe, a larger apartment, maybe even a house in the hills. Her ambition rolled off her tongue like honey, sweet and sticky. "Your wife doesn't understand your potential," Vanessa said, settling beside him on the leather sofa. "She's satisfied with small things, small dreams. But you," she let her fingers trail along his arm, "you're meant for more than suburban mediocrity." Adam felt the familiar rush of being understood, of being seen as the man he believed himself to be, rather than the husband he had become. Vanessa fed his ego in ways that Lydia never could, never would. Where his wife offered steady love, Vanessa offered excitement. Where Lydia provided comfort, Vanessa provided challenge. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd met you first," he said, the wine making him more honest than he intended. "You did meet me first," Vanessa replied with a sly smile. "You just made some detours along the way." Meanwhile, Lydia had finally accepted what her heart had been whispering for months. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step a small negotiation with her changing body and her breaking heart. In their bedroom, their shared space that had become increasingly his territory, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her wedding ring. 5 years. 5 years of believing in forever, of building a life, of creating a safe harbor for the family they were about to become. But safe harbors meant nothing if the ship had already sailed away. She slipped the ring from her finger, feeling its familiar weight one last time before placing it carefully on Adam's pillow. Then she moved to the small desk in the corner and began to write, her hand steady despite the tears that fell freely now. Adam, she wrote, this was the last time I waited for you. The baby and I are leaving. Not to punish you, to survive. The words came slowly but surely, each one a small act of courage. She wasn't writing in anger, though anger burned in her chest. She wasn't writing for revenge, though the desire for justice whispered at the edges of her consciousness. She was writing for the child inside her, for the future that stretched ahead like an uncharted road. As dawn approached in the penthouse, Adam finally stirred from Vanessa's embrace. Reality began to seep back in like cold air through a cracked window. He had a pregnant wife at home. He had responsibilities. He had a life that didn't include crystal wine glasses and city skylines. I should go, he said, though his body felt heavy with wine and satisfaction. Vanessa's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that might have been disappointment or calculation. Of course. Back to your other life. By the time Adam's key turned in the lock of his Pasadena home, the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. He moved through the house quietly, noting the cold dinner still on the table, the burned-down candles, the silence that seemed to echo with accusation. In the bedroom, he expected to find Lydia sleeping, probably turned away from his side of the bed as she had been doing lately. Instead, he found something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The ring caught the early morning light like a small star against the white pillowcase. Beside it, folded neatly, was an envelope with his name written in Lydia's careful handwriting. For the first time in months, Adam Collins felt the world shift beneath his feet. And 25 miles away, Vanessa Moore was already planning her next move, unaware that she had just played her part in the opening act of her own downfall. Adam's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter, the paper crackling in the morning silence like autumn leaves underfoot. The familiar curves of Lydia's handwriting, the same hand that had written love notes in his lunch bag during their first year of marriage, now delivered words that cut deeper than any blade. Adam, this was the last time I waited for you. The baby and I are leaving, not to punish you, to survive. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight as if the world itself was tilting. The scent of Vanessa's perfume still clung to his clothes, a sickly sweet reminder of where he had been while his pregnant wife made the decision to abandon their life together. I know about the late meetings that smell like wine and someone else's perfume. I know about the phone calls you take in another room. I know about the receipts for restaurants we've never been to together. I've known for months, Adam. I just kept hoping you would choose us. The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears he hadn't expected. In his arrogance, he had believed himself invisible, untouchable. Lydia, sweet, trusting Lydia, had been watching, gathering evidence not for warfare, but for survival. I've spent the last 3 weeks preparing for this moment. Henry Dawson will be contacting you regarding the legal arrangements for our separation and the baby's welfare. I've taken only what's mine and what I need to start over. I don't want to destroy you, Adam. I just want to save us. Henry Dawson. The name hit him like a physical blow. Lydia's family lawyer, the man who had handled her grandmother's estate, who had walked her through the complicated probate process when her parents died in the car accident 5 years ago. A quiet, methodical man who specialized in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Adam's phone buzzed against the nightstand. Unknown number. Mr. Collins, this is Henry Dawson. I believe you've received correspondence from my client regarding the dissolution of your marriage and arrangements for the minor child. The lawyer's voice was calm, professional, devoid of judgment, but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. Adam felt his throat constrict. Where is she? Adam managed to croak out. Where's my wife? Mrs. Collins is in a safe location with appropriate medical supervision for her condition. She's 36 weeks pregnant, Mr. Collins. Her health and the health of your child are the primary concerns at this time. This is insane. She can't just... She can, and she has. Dawson interrupted gently but firmly. California is a no-fault divorce state. Mrs. Collins has filed for legal separation with arrangements for spousal support, child support, and custody to be determined after the birth. She's also obtained a temporary restraining order, requiring you to maintain a 50-foot distance from her person and her residence. The words crashed over Adam like a tsunami. Restraining order. Legal separation. His Lydia, quiet, accommodating Lydia, had transformed into a strategic opponent while he had been playing house with Vanessa. I need to see her. To explain, any communication must go through my office. Mrs. Collins has made it clear that direct contact will only cause additional stress, which could endanger the pregnancy. Adam ended the call and stared at the phone in his hand as if it had betrayed him. Outside Los Angeles was waking up to another perfect day, but inside the house that had once felt like a sanctuary, everything was falling apart. Meanwhile, 200 miles south in San Diego, Lydia sat in her sister Rebecca's guest bedroom, morning sunlight streaming through gauze curtains as she sorted through the legal documents Henry had prepared. At 33, Rebecca shared Lydia's gentle features but possessed a steelier resolve, a pediatric nurse who had seen enough of life's cruelties to recognize the signs when someone was drowning. "You did the right thing," Rebecca said, settling beside her with 2 cups of herbal tea. "Mom would be proud." Lydia's hand moved instinctively to her belly, where the baby was beginning to stir with the morning activity. "I keep thinking I should feel angrier. Shouldn't I want him to suffer?" "You want him to understand, that's different." Rebecca studied her sister's profile. "You're not built for revenge, Lydia. You're built for survival. And that's exactly what you're doing." The documentation spread across the bed told the story of a woman who had been planning her escape, with the precision of a general preparing for battle. Bank statements showing the separate accounts she had quietly opened. Copies of Adam's financial records that she had photographed over the past month. Documentation of his suspicious activities, not for public humiliation, but for legal protection. "Henry says the temporary support order will go into effect immediately," Lydia said, reviewing the papers. "It's not about the money, really. It's about making sure the baby has what they need." Back in Pasadena, Adam was discovering the first cracks in the foundation of his carefully constructed life. His attempt to access their joint savings account was denied, frozen pending the legal proceedings. His credit cards, the ones in both their names, had been canceled. The house, which he had assumed was his domain, was actually in both their names, and Lydia's legal team had already filed preliminary paperwork for asset division. His phone rang again. This time it was Marcus Webb, his business partner and closest friend. "Adam, what the hell is going on? I just got a call from someone claiming to represent your wife about business assets. It's complicated." "Complicated? Dude, my lawyer is telling me we might need to freeze the partnership accounts until your domestic situation is resolved. This affects our business, our clients. Just give me a few days to sort this out." "A few days? Adam, wake up. Your wife didn't just leave, she declared war. And from where I'm sitting, it looks like she came prepared for battle while you were—" Marcus paused, the accusation hanging in the air. "Jesus, tell me this isn't about Vanessa." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "We'll talk later," Marcus said finally, his voice cold with disappointment. As the morning progressed, Adam began to understand the scope of Lydia's preparation. She hadn't acted in emotional haste. She had planned with the methodical care of someone who understood that her survival, and their child's future, depended on being 10 steps ahead of a man who had stopped paying attention to anything but his own desires. The irony wasn't lost on him. While he had been celebrating his cleverness with Vanessa, believing himself untouchable in his deception, Lydia had been quietly, efficiently, building the framework for a life without him. In San Diego, Lydia felt the baby's kick against her ribs and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not from happiness, she wasn't ready for that yet, but from something deeper and more sustaining. Relief. She had chosen to survive, and for the first time in months, survival felt possible. 25 miles away in her downtown apartment, Vanessa Moore was staring at her phone, wondering why Adam hadn't called. She had no idea that the foundation of everything she had been building her ambitions upon had just crumbled to dust. The game was changing, and only one player had read the rules. 3 days after finding the letter, Adam sat in his empty house surrounded by the debris of his former life. Takeout containers littered the coffee table, and the scent of Lydia's vanilla candles still lingered in the air like a ghost of better times. His appearance had deteriorated rapidly. Stubble shadowed his jaw, his usually pristine shirts were wrinkled, and his eyes carried the hollow look of a man who had finally grasped the magnitude of his losses. He scrolled through his phone, thumb hovering over Vanessa's contact. She represented his only remaining anchor to the life he thought he wanted, the sophisticated world that had seemed so much more appealing than domestic evenings with his pregnant wife. The phone rang twice before her voice purred through the speaker. "Adam, darling, I was wondering when you'd call. It's been 3 days. Vanessa, I need to see you. Something's happened." There was a pause, and he could almost hear her recalibrating, shifting from seductive to strategic. "What kind of something?" "Lydia left. She's filed for separation." There are lawyers involved and, oh my God, that's fantastic. Vanessa's excitement cut through his words like a blade. I mean, I'm sorry you're going through this, but Adam, don't you see? This is what we've been waiting for. Now we can finally be together properly. No more sneaking around, no more. Vanessa, you don't understand. She's taken everything. The accounts are frozen, the business partnership is in jeopardy, and the silence stretched between them, and Adam could practically hear the gears turning in Vanessa's mind. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted from celebration to concern, not for him, but for what this might mean for her carefully laid plans. How much of everything? The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Adam realized with crystalline clarity that Vanessa hadn't been falling in love with him. She had been falling in love with what he represented: security, status, access to a lifestyle she couldn't achieve on her own. The man sitting in his empty house in yesterday's clothes was not the prize she had been playing for. I don't know yet, he admitted. The lawyers are still sorting through it all. Well, I'm sure it's just temporary, Vanessa said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. These things get worked out, you'll land on your feet. But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Adam could hear her retreating. The woman who had whispered promises about their future together was already calculating her exit strategy. Meanwhile, 120 miles south, Lydia was discovering that survival required more than legal preparation. It demanded the reconstruction of an entire identity. In Rebecca's guest room, she sat cross-legged on the bed, laptop open, updating her resume for the first time in 2 years. Administrative coordinator, she typed, then deleted it. Office manager, delete. Executive assistant. You're overthinking it, Rebecca said from the doorway, carrying a tray with lunch and prenatal vitamins. Any company would be lucky to have you. I've been out of the workforce for almost 3 years, Lydia said, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. And now I'm 36 weeks pregnant. Who's going to hire me? Someone who recognizes competence when they see it. Rebecca settled beside her sister. You managed Adam's entire life for 5 years. You coordinated his schedule, handled his social obligations, managed the household finances. That's not nothing, Lydia. That's everything. As if summoned by their conversation, Lydia's phone buzzed with a text from Henry Dawson. Adam's attorney has requested mediation. Are you prepared to discuss terms? Lydia stared at the message, feeling the baby shift restlessly inside her as if sensing her tension. The reality of facing Adam across a conference table, of negotiating the dissolution of everything they had built together, felt overwhelming. But then she remembered the cold anniversary dinner, the nights spent wondering where her husband was, the gradual erosion of her self-worth as she had made excuse after excuse for his absence. She typed back, when and where. Back in Los Angeles, Adam's professional world was beginning to unravel with the same methodical precision that had characterized Lydia's departure. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway of Adam's office, his expression grim. The Morrison account wants to pull out, Marcus announced without preamble. They're concerned about instability in the partnership structure. Adam looked up from the financial documents he'd been reviewing, trying to understand the scope of Lydia's legal maneuvering. They can't do that. We have a contract. They can, and they will. Word travels fast in this business, Adam. People are talking about frozen assets, legal proceedings, domestic disputes affecting business operations. Marcus sat down heavily. I need to know. How bad is this? For the first time since finding the letter, Adam was forced to articulate the reality of his situation. She documented everything. Every dinner meeting I claimed to have but didn't. Every late night I blamed on work. Every business expense that was actually... He trailed off. Personal entertainment, Marcus finished. Jesus, Adam, how long? 6 months. 6 months of lying to your pregnant wife while using company resources to fund an affair. Marcus rubbed his temples. Do you understand what this means for the business, for our reputation? The weight of it settled over Adam like a burial shroud. His personal betrayal hadn't existed in a vacuum. It had infected every aspect of his professional life, undermining the trust and credibility he had spent years building. Meanwhile, Vanessa was having her own reckoning. She sat in her downtown apartment, scrolling through her contacts with the predatory focus of someone reassessing her options. Adam's sudden vulnerability had changed the equation entirely. A man embroiled in messy divorce proceedings, with frozen assets and a damaged professional reputation, was not the stepping stone she had envisioned. Her phone rang. Her boss at the marketing firm where she worked. Vanessa, we need to talk. There are some concerns about your association with the Collins situation. What do you mean? The business community is smaller than you think. Word is getting around about Adam Collins's domestic issues, and your name is coming up in conversations. We can't have our employees' personal lives creating liability concerns for our clients. Vanessa felt the first cold touch of real fear. Her relationship with Adam hadn't just been about romance or even ambition. It had been about access, connections, the ability to leverage his success into her own advancement. Now, instead of elevating her, their association was dragging her down. "I'll handle it," she said. But even as she spoke, she could hear the doubt in her own voice. In San Diego, Lydia finished her resume and closed the laptop. Through the window, she could see children playing in the neighborhood park, their laughter carrying on the ocean breeze. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine her own child taking first steps on that same grass, learning to swing on those same swings. It wouldn't be the life she had planned, but it would be a life free from the constant anxiety of wondering where she stood in her own marriage. It would be a life where her love wasn't taken for granted, where her trust wasn't a commodity to be traded for temporary excitement. She felt the baby kick, strong and insistent, and smiled. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her unborn daughter. "It won't be easy, but we're going to be okay." Back in his empty house, Adam poured himself another drink and stared at the photo on the mantelpiece. Him and Lydia on their wedding day, both of them radiant with hope and possibility. The man in that photo believed in forever. The woman in that photo had trusted him with her heart, her future, her dreams. He had traded all of it for 6 months of feeling desired by someone who was already calculating her escape route. For the first time since this nightmare began, Adam understood that he hadn't just lost his wife and child. He had lost himself. The law offices of Dawson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a modest building in downtown San Diego, far from the gleaming towers where Adam usually conducted business. The conference room was simple but professional: polished oak table, ergonomic chairs, and windows that offered a view of the bay where sailboats dotted the horizon like scattered prayers. Adam arrived 15 minutes early. His lawyer, Jonathan Rivers, a divorce specialist recommended by Marcus, in tow. Rivers was everything Adam had expected: expensive suit, predatory smile, and the kind of confidence that came from years of dismantling marriages for profit. "Remember," Rivers murmured as they settled into their seats, "this is just an opening negotiation. We don't accept anything on first offer." But when the door opened and Lydia walked in, 8 months pregnant and radiating a quiet dignity that Adam remembered but had forgotten to cherish, all of Rivers's strategic advice evaporated from his mind. She moved carefully, one hand supporting her back, but her eyes were clear and determined. Behind her, Henry Dawson carried himself with the unhurried confidence of a man who held all the cards. "Lydia," Adam started to rise, some instinct toward courtesy overriding the legal formalities. "Please remain seated, Mr. Collins," Dawson said smoothly. "We're here to discuss the practical arrangements for the dissolution of your marriage and the welfare of your unborn child." Adam watched his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, settle into her chair with the careful movements of advanced pregnancy. She didn't look at him directly, but he could see the exhaustion in the lines around her eyes, the way she pressed her lips together when the baby shifted. He had done this to her. His choices had driven her to this sterile room, this formal dismantling of everything they had built together. "The primary concern," Dawson continued, "is ensuring financial security for the child. Given that Mrs. Collins has been out of the workforce for 3 years and is entering single motherhood, we're seeking substantial spousal and child support." Rivers leaned forward. "My client is prepared to be reasonable, but given the circumstances, Mrs. Collins's sudden departure, the freezing of accounts without discussion, the circumstances," Lydia spoke for the first time, her voice steady but carrying an edge Adam had never heard before, "are 6 months of infidelity documented through credit card receipts, restaurant reservations, and hotel charges. Would you like me to provide the detailed timeline, Mr. Rivers?" The lawyer's confident expression flickered. Adam felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized Lydia had been methodically building a case, while he had been congratulating himself on his discretion. "Furthermore," Dawson added, producing a folder thick with documents, "Mrs. Collins has evidence of marital assets being used to fund extramarital activities. Expensive dinners, gifts, weekend trips, all charged to joint accounts without her knowledge or consent." Adam watched the numbers scroll past. Hundreds, then thousands of dollars spent on Vanessa while Lydia had been carefully managing their household budget, talking about putting money aside for the baby's college fund. Each receipt was a small betrayal, each charge a moment when he had chosen his own pleasure over his family's security. "We're prepared to discuss terms," Rivers said, but his voice had lost its earlier aggression. While the lawyers negotiated the mechanics of their separation, Adam found himself studying Lydia's profile. She had always been beautiful in an understated way, but pregnancy had given her a kind of luminous strength that took his breath away. This was the woman who should have been glowing with happiness about their first child, decorating a nursery, planning for their future as a family. Instead, she was calculating how to survive his betrayal. 2 hours later, they emerged from the building into the San Diego sunshine. Adam watched Lydia walk slowly toward a car where Rebecca waited, and felt an overwhelming urge to run after her, to somehow undo the past 6 months with words he should have said but never did. Instead, he got into his rental car and drove back to Los Angeles, where his other life was continuing its systematic collapse. Vanessa was waiting in his office when he arrived, but not in the way he had hoped. She stood near the window in a crisp business suit, her posture rigid with barely contained anger. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "Vanessa, today was hell. The lawyers, the mediation. I'm being transferred." She cut him off. "My company is moving me to the Phoenix office, effective immediately." Adam stared at her, processing the implications. "What? Why?" "Because being associated with you has become a liability." Her voice carried none of its usual sultry warmth. "Do you know what it's like to have colleagues whisper about your involvement with that Collins situation? To have clients request different account managers because they're uncomfortable with the drama? This is temporary. Once the divorce is finalized, you'll be paying substantial alimony and child support. Your business reputation will be permanently damaged. And I'll have wasted the best years of my career on a man who couldn't even manage his personal life competently." The words hit him like physical blows. This was Vanessa, without the seductive mask, without the carefully crafted persona designed to make him feel like the most important man in the world. This was a woman cutting her losses. "I thought you loved me," he said, and immediately hated himself for the pathetic neediness in his voice. Vanessa's laugh was sharp and humorless. "I loved what you represented. Success, stability, access to a lifestyle I couldn't achieve on my own. But you've thrown all of that away for what? The thrill of cheating on your pregnant wife? The excitement of sneaking around like a teenager?" She gathered her purse and moved toward the door. "I'm taking the Phoenix job. It's a promotion, actually. Senior account manager, higher salary, better prospects. Amazing what becomes possible when you're not tied to a sinking ship." "Vanessa, wait." But she was already gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of her perfume and the crushing realization that everything he had sacrificed his marriage for had been built on calculated deception. Marcus appeared in the doorway moments later, his expression grim. That was Vanessa Moore, wasn't it? Adam nodded, unable to trust his voice. "Adam, I need you to understand something. The partners have been talking. The Morrison account was just the beginning. Word is spreading about the business expenses, the affairs, the domestic drama. Our clients don't want to be associated with that kind of instability. I can fix this." "How? By going back in time and not screwing your pregnant wife over for 6 months? By not using company resources to fund your midlife crisis?" Marcus sat down heavily. "I've known you for 8 years. I was the best man at your wedding. I held your head when you got food poisoning in Cabo, and I have no idea who you've become." The office felt suffocating, the walls closing in with the weight of his poor choices. Adam looked around at the awards on the walls, the photos from company retreats, the evidence of a successful career that was crumbling as surely as his marriage had. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the partnership is over. The other partners are buying you out. We'll honor your existing contracts, but after that," Marcus stood to leave. "Get your life together, Adam, because right now you're losing everything that ever mattered." That evening, Adam sat alone in his empty house, scrolling through his phone contacts and realizing how few real friends he had left. The people he had considered close were actually business associates, couples he and Lydia had socialized with, people whose loyalty had always been to them as a unit, rather than to him individually. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Lydia was having dinner with Rebecca's family, her brother-in-law Tom, their 2 young children, and Rebecca herself. The conversation was light, focused on everyday things, school projects, weekend plans, the approaching holiday season. It was the kind of normal family interaction that Adam had taken for granted and was now desperately missing. "Aunt Lydia?" 7-year-old Emma piped up. "When the baby comes, can I teach her how to ride a bike?" Lydia's hand moved to her belly, and she smiled. The first genuine smile Adam had seen from her in months, if he had been there to witness it. "I think she'd love that." "What if it's a boy?" asked 9-year-old Jake. "Then he'd love it too." Watching his wife navigate this simple family moment with grace and warmth, Tom felt a surge of protective anger toward the man who had thrown away something so precious. But he kept his thoughts to himself, focusing instead on making sure Lydia felt welcomed and supported. After dinner, as Lydia helped clear the table despite Rebecca's protests, she felt the baby's strong kick and paused, her hand pressed against her side. "She's active tonight," Rebecca observed. "She knows she's going to be born into love," Lydia said quietly. "That's enough for now." Back in Los Angeles, Adam poured himself another drink and stared at his phone, thumb hovering over Lydia's number. But what could he say? That he was sorry? That he missed her? That he had finally understood what he had thrown away, but only after it was too late to matter? Instead, he set the phone aside and faced the silence of his empty house, where the only sound was the echo of choices that could never be undone. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October. Adam jolted awake in his empty house, reaching for his phone with the reflexive panic of someone whose life had become a series of disasters waiting to unfold. The number was blocked, but something in his chest told him to answer. "Mr. Collins?" The voice was professional, clinical. "This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Scripps Memorial Hospital in San Diego. I'm calling to inform you that your daughter was born at 11:32 p.m. Both mother and baby are healthy." Adam sat up in bed, the words hitting him like a physical force. Daughter. He had a daughter. While he had been lying awake wrestling with the ruins of his life, Lydia had been bringing their child into the world, alone, surrounded by Rebecca's family instead of her husband. "Is she... Can I... Mrs. Collins has requested that all communication go through her attorney. I'm only authorized to provide basic health information. Your daughter weighed 6 pounds, 8 ounces, and measured 19 inches. She's perfectly healthy." The line went dead, leaving Adam staring at his phone in the darkness. He was a father. The reality should have filled him with joy, but instead it felt like another layer of loss. His daughter's first breath, first cry, first moments of life had happened without him, and that absence was his own creation. He scrolled through his contacts until he found Henry Dawson's office number, knowing it was too early but needing some connection to this monumental moment. The call went to voicemail, and Adam's voice cracked as he left a message. "This is Adam Collins. I heard about the baby. My daughter. I want to see her. Please call me back." In San Diego, Lydia lay in her hospital bed, holding 7-hour-old Grace Elizabeth Collins, a name she had chosen during the long months of pregnancy, inspired by her grandmother's middle name and the grace she hoped to embody as a single mother. The baby slept peacefully against her chest, tiny fingers curled in perfect trust. Rebecca sat in the chair beside the bed, having refused to leave despite Lydia's protests that she needed sleep. "She's perfect," Rebecca whispered, stroking the baby's dark hair. "Look at those fingers. She's going to be a pianist. Or a surgeon," Lydia murmured, studying her daughter's face for traces of Adam's features. She could see his nose, the shape of his eyes, but Grace's expression held something entirely her own, a peaceful certainty that spoke of a soul untroubled by the complications of the adult world. "Have you thought about what you'll tell him?" Rebecca asked gently. "He has a right to know she's here. Dr. Martinez called him an hour ago. He's been informed." Lydia's voice was steady, but Rebecca could see the exhaustion behind her sister's calm facade. "Henry will handle the visitation arrangements once I'm ready." "And when will that be?" Lydia looked down at Grace, who stirred slightly at the sound of voices. "When I'm strong enough to see him hold her and not fall apart." Meanwhile, 300 miles north in Phoenix, Vanessa Moore was discovering that running away from consequences didn't make them disappear. Her new position as senior account manager had come with elevated responsibilities and scrutiny that made her previous association with Adam's scandal even more problematic. She sat in her sterile corporate apartment, boxes still unpacked around her, scrolling through LinkedIn updates from her Los Angeles contacts. The business community was smaller than she had hoped, and whispers of her involvement in the Collins affair had followed her across state lines. Her phone buzzed with a text from her new supervisor. "Need to discuss the Morrison Industries situation. They're asking questions about your previous associations. Can you meet first thing tomorrow? Vanessa stared at the message, feeling the walls closing in. Morrison Industries, the same client that had pulled out of Adam's business, was now one of her key accounts in Phoenix. The irony was suffocating. She poured herself a glass of wine and stood at her window, looking out at the desert landscape that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her chance to rebuild her career away from the wreckage of her poor judgment. Instead, she was learning that in the interconnected world of corporate America, running only delayed the reckoning. Back in Los Angeles, Adam's professional collapse was accelerating. He sat in his office, soon to be former office, clearing out personal items while Marcus supervised the transition. The partnership buyout was proceeding, but at a fraction of what his stake would have been worth just 6 months earlier. The Henderson project? Adam asked, holding up a file. Transferred to Peterson's team. They want continuity, and frankly, they don't want the Collins name attached to anything right now. Each answer was another small death, another piece of the life he had built being parceled out to colleagues who had once looked up to him. Adam had always taken pride in his reputation for reliability, his ability to build lasting business relationships. Now he was discovering how quickly professional trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. What about the Riverside development? Gone. The investors specifically requested that you have no involvement in ongoing projects. Marcus paused in his inventory, studying his former partner with something between pity and frustration. Adam, you need to understand something. This isn't just about the divorce or the affair. It's about judgment. Our clients trusted us to make smart decisions, to be stable, to represent their interests with integrity. When you used company resources to fund a 6-month affair while lying to your pregnant wife, you demonstrated that your judgment is fundamentally compromised. The words cut deeper than any of the legal documents or financial settlements. Adam's identity had been built around his professional competence, his ability to navigate complex business relationships with skill and integrity. That foundation was now revealed to be as fragile as his marriage had been. That evening, Adam found himself driving aimlessly through the streets of Los Angeles, past the restaurant where he and Vanessa had shared their first dinner, past the hotel where they had spent countless afternoons, past the places that had seemed so sophisticated and exciting just months earlier. Now they felt like crime scenes, monuments to the worst decisions of his life. His phone rang as he sat at a red light. Henry Dawson's office number. Mr. Collins? I understand you called about visiting your daughter. Yes, I want to see her. She's my child too. Mrs. Collins is prepared to discuss supervised visitation once she's recovered from childbirth and has had time to establish a routine with the baby. Given the circumstances of your separation and the restraining order, supervised visitation? Adam's voice rose. She's my daughter. She's also an infant whose mother is a nursing single parent recovering from childbirth. Mrs. Collins's well-being directly affects your daughter's well-being. I suggest you focus on demonstrating stability and responsibility rather than making demands. The call ended, leaving Adam sitting alone in his car as traffic moved around him. Supervised visitation. The phrase echoed in his mind like a judgment. He would need permission to see his own child, would need to prove himself worthy of an hour in her presence. In San Diego, Lydia was learning the profound exhaustion and overwhelming love that came with new motherhood. Grace had been awake for most of the night, nursing and fussing, and Lydia found herself crying along with her daughter, not from frustration, but from the sheer intensity of caring for someone so completely dependent on her. Rebecca found her at dawn, sitting in the rocking chair by the window, Grace finally sleeping peacefully in her arms. How are you holding up? I keep thinking about what kind of man doesn't fight to be present for his child's birth, Lydia said quietly. Even after everything, I thought he would find a way to be here. Maybe he tried. The restraining order only applies to me, not the hospital. He could have come. He could have asked to be in the waiting room. He could have tried to show me that being a father mattered more than his pride. Lydia looked down at Grace's sleeping face. But he didn't. And that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of father he'll be. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating the small family they had become. Aunt, mother, and baby, bound together by love and necessity rather than legal obligations or broken promises. 300 miles away, Adam sat in his empty house, holding a cup of cold coffee and staring at his phone, where a baby clothing website remained open in his browser. He had been trying to buy something, anything to send to his daughter, but every item seemed inadequate. every gesture too small to bridge the gap his choices had created. He had gained a daughter and lost the right to truly be her father, all in the space of a single night. The sun was rising on a world where Grace Elizabeth Collins existed, perfect and innocent, while the man who had helped create her remained trapped in the consequences of choices that seemed to multiply like shadows, stretching further into his future with each passing day. The Family Services building in San Diego was a study in institutional neutrality, beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the kind of generic artwork that was meant to be calming but instead felt hollow. Adam sat in the waiting area, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the door through which he would meet his daughter for the first time. 3 weeks had passed since Grace's birth, 3 weeks of lawyers and paperwork and supervised visitation protocols that treated him like a potential threat to his own child. He wore his best suit, had gotten his hair cut, had even practiced holding a doll that Rebecca's daughter Emma had helped him select at the toy store. Nothing felt adequate for this moment. The door opened and a social worker named Janet Morrison emerged, a middle-aged woman whose kind eyes had clearly witnessed too many fractured families. "Mr. Collins, we're ready for you." The visitation room was designed to be welcoming, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, toys scattered around. But the one-way window and the supervisor's notepad made the artificial nature of the setting impossible to ignore. And then Lydia walked in, carrying a bundle of pink blankets, and nothing else mattered. "Hello, Adam," she said quietly, and he was struck by how much she had changed. Motherhood had transformed her in ways that went beyond the physical. There was a strength in her posture, a protectiveness in the way she held their daughter, a confidence he had never seen before. "Lydia, He stopped, unsure how to bridge the chasm between them with words. "Thank you for this." She nodded toward the chair. "Sit down. I'll show you how to hold her." Grace Elizabeth Collins was perfect in the way that only newborns could be. Impossibly small, features soft and undefined, eyes that seemed to look directly through him to something he couldn't fathom. When Lydia placed her in his arms, Adam felt his chest constrict with an emotion so powerful it took his breath away. "She's beautiful," he whispered, afraid to speak louder and disturb the miracle of her sleeping face. "She is." Lydia settled into the chair across from him, maintaining the required distance while watching his every movement. "She's a good baby. Sleeps well, eats well, very calm." Adam studied his daughter's features, searching for pieces of himself and Lydia in the perfect composition of her face. Her nose was his, but the shape of her eyes came from her mother. Her fingers were long and delicate. Piano fingers, Rebecca had called them. "What is she like?" he asked, feeling foolish for not knowing how to talk about a 3-week-old baby. "Music. Rebecca plays guitar for her sometimes, and she likes to be walked around the house. The movement puts her to sleep." Lydia's voice was carefully neutral, offering information without intimacy. "She doesn't like loud noises, but then, most babies don't." For 45 minutes, Adam held his daughter and tried to memorize everything. The weight of her in his arms, the way her hand curled around his finger, the soft sounds she made in her sleep. He talked to her quietly, telling her about the mobile he had bought for her nursery, about the college fund he was setting up, about how sorry he was for missing her first days of life. When the visit ended and Lydia took Grace back, Adam felt as if someone had removed a vital organ. He watched them leave through the same door they had entered, and knew that this sterile room would define his relationship with his daughter for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Vanessa's carefully constructed new life was unraveling with mechanical precision. She sat across from her supervisor, Daniel Torres, in a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and failed ambitions. "The Morrison Industries situation has become untenable," Torres said without preamble. "They've made it clear that they're uncomfortable with your previous association with Adam Collins, and frankly, so are we." Vanessa kept her expression neutral, but inside she felt the familiar panic of watching an opportunity slip away. "My previous relationship has no bearing on my professional capabilities." Perhaps not, but perception matters in this business. When clients start asking questions about our team members' personal lives, it creates liability concerns. "What are you saying?" Torres slid a folder across the table. "We're restructuring your position. You'll be moving to junior account coordinator, handling smaller regional clients. The salary adjustment is outlined in the paperwork." Vanessa opened the folder and felt her stomach drop. The adjustment was a 40% pay cut, effectively demoting her to a position she had held 3 years earlier. The elegant apartment, the designer clothes, the lifestyle she had built, all of it would have to be downsized to match her diminished prospects. "This is about Adam Collins," she said, abandoning any pretense of professionalism. "This is about making business decisions that protect our company's reputation," Torres replied. "Your involvement with a married client created complications that followed you here. We can't ignore that." Walking back to her office, Vanessa felt the weight of stares from colleagues who had heard the rumors, seen the whispered conversations, drawn their own conclusions about the woman who had been transferred from Los Angeles under mysterious circumstances. She had built her career on being perceived as successful, sophisticated, connected. Now she was the cautionary tale, the woman whose ambition had led her to make catastrophically poor choices. Back in San Diego, Lydia was establishing the rhythms of single motherhood. The days blended together in a cycle of feedings and diaper changes and brief stolen moments of sleep. Rebecca had taken leave from her nursing job to help during those first crucial weeks, but Lydia knew that soon she would need to manage on her own. "The job interviews are going well," she told Rebecca as they sat in the living room, Grace sleeping peacefully in her bouncy seat. "The marketing firm seems interested and they're okay with a flexible schedule. What about daycare? There's a place near the office that has good ratings. It's expensive, but..." Lydia shrugged. "We'll make it work. The child support will help once it's finalized." Lydia looked down at her daughter, who was starting to stir. "I don't want to count on anything from Adam. If it comes, fine, but I want to know we can survive on our own." It was a philosophy born of necessity and betrayal, the understanding that the person who should have been her partner in raising this child had forfeited that role through his own choices. She would accept his financial support because Grace deserved it, but she would never again make the mistake of depending on Adam Collins for anything essential. That evening, Adam drove back to Los Angeles with the memory of Grace's weight in his arms and the devastating realization that he was already becoming a stranger in his daughter's life. Every mile that separated them felt like another small death, another consequence of choices that continued to ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. His phone rang as he passed through Orange County. Unknown number. "Is this Adam Collins?" "Yes. This is Detective Sarah Kim with the Los Angeles Police Department. We're investigating a complaint filed by Ms. Vanessa Moore regarding harassment and threatening behavior. We'd like to schedule a time for you to come in for questioning." Adam pulled over to the side of the freeway, his hands shaking. "What kind of complaint?" "She's alleging that you've been calling her repeatedly, sending unwanted gifts to her workplace, and making threats regarding her transfer to Phoenix." "That's not true. I haven't contacted her since she left. We'll need to discuss this in person, Mr. Collins. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" The call ended, leaving Adam sitting in his car on the shoulder of Interstate 5, watching traffic stream past while his life continued its systematic destruction. Vanessa, faced with the consequences of her own choices, was apparently deciding that destroying him completely was preferable to accepting responsibility for her role in their shared downfall. In Phoenix, Vanessa sat in her downsized apartment, staring at the police report she had filed that morning. It was a desperate move, she knew, but desperation had become her constant companion since arriving in Arizona. If she could paint herself as the victim of Adam's obsession, rather than the willing participant in his betrayal, perhaps she could salvage something from the wreckage of her ambitions. The lies came easily now, each one building on the last, until she had constructed an alternate version of events where she had been manipulated rather than calculating, pursued rather than pursuing. It felt better than the truth, which was that she had gambled everything on a married man's promises and lost spectacularly. In San Diego, Lydia fed Grace her evening bottle and sang softly, a lullaby her own mother had sung, passed down through generations of women who had learned to find strength in nurturing love. Grace's eyes fluttered closed, and Lydia felt the deep satisfaction that came from providing everything her daughter needed. She thought briefly of Adam, wondered how his first visit had affected him, whether he truly understood what he had given up, but the thought passed quickly, replaced by the more immediate concerns of bath time and bedtime routines, and the precious quiet hours when she could simply hold her daughter and know that they were safe. Outside, the San Diego evening was soft and warm, filled with the sound of families gathering for dinner, children playing in yards, the ordinary magic of people who had built their lives on love rather than deception. Inside, mother and daughter continued the ancient dance of care and protection, building a bond that no court order or visitation schedule could ever truly define or diminish. The Los Angeles Police Department's Van Nuys division occupied a building that had seen better decades, its institutional green walls and flickering fluorescent lights creating an atmosphere of weary bureaucracy. Adam sat in interview room 3, his hands folded on the metal table as Detective Sarah Kim reviewed a file thick with what he assumed were Vanessa's fabrications. Mr. Collins, Ms. Moore has provided us with detailed documentation of what she describes as a pattern of harassment following her transfer to Phoenix, Detective Kim said, her voice professionally neutral. Phone records showing multiple calls to her office, delivery receipts for flowers and gifts sent to her workplace, and statements from colleagues about your alleged threatening behavior. Adam stared at the detective, feeling as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. Detective, I haven't contacted Vanessa since she left Los Angeles 6 weeks ago. I can provide you with my phone records, my credit card statements, anything you need to verify that. We'll need those records, yes, but I have to ask, given the emotional stress of your divorce, the loss of your business partnership, might you have reached out to Ms. Moore without fully remembering? Perhaps after drinking? The question hit him like a physical blow. Adam realized that his reputation had deteriorated to the point where a police detective was suggesting he might be an alcoholic stalker who couldn't remember his own actions. 6 months ago, he had been a respected businessman with an intact marriage and a sterling reputation. Now he was sitting in a police station defending himself against charges that would have been laughable if they weren't so potentially devastating. Detective, I understand why you have to ask these questions, but I'm telling you the truth. I haven't contacted Vanessa Moore in any way since she moved to Phoenix. Detective Kim made notes in her file, her expression giving nothing away. We'll verify your records against the timeline Ms. Moore provided. If her claims are substantiated, you could be facing charges of stalking and harassment, possibly criminal threats. If they're not, she paused, well, filing false police reports is also a crime. Meanwhile, in Phoenix, Vanessa was discovering that lies like credit card debt accumulated interest over time. She sat in her reduced apartment, a one-bedroom unit in a complex that advertised affordable luxury, but delivered neither, staring at her laptop screen where her fabricated evidence looked increasingly thin under scrutiny. The phone records she had doctored showed calls from Adam's number, but a competent investigator would quickly discover that the timestamps coincided with documented meetings Adam had been attending in Los Angeles. The flower delivery receipts were real, but the credit card information was falsified, a detail she had hoped would go unnoticed but now seemed glaringly obvious. Her phone rang. Unknown California number. Ms. Moore, this is Detective Kim with the LAPD. I need to clarify some details in your statement regarding Mr. Collins. Vanessa's mouth went dry. Of course, Detective. Whatever you need. The phone calls you reported. Can you tell me more about the content of these conversations? He was threatening, saying that I had ruined his life, that he would make sure I paid for what I had done to his marriage. The lies rolled off her tongue with practiced ease, but she could hear the slight tremor in her own voice. And these calls occurred while you were at work? Yes, that's right. My colleagues heard some of them. They were very concerned. I see. And the gifts he sent? Can you describe them? Vanessa detailed the flowers and chocolates that existed only in her imagination, adding embellishments that she hoped would make the story more convincing. But with each fabrication, she felt herself sinking deeper into a quicksand of deception that would be impossible to escape if the truth emerged. Ms. Moore will need to speak with your colleagues who witnessed these incidents. Can you provide their contact information? The question hung in the air like a sword. Vanessa realized she would now need to convince her co-workers to corroborate lies they knew nothing about, or face the consequences of filing a false police report in 2 states. I'll have to get back to you with those details, she said, ending the call with trembling fingers. In San Diego, Lydia was experiencing the opposite trajectory. Her job interview at Morrison Digital Marketing had gone better than expected, and she was now employed as a project coordinator with a salary that, while modest, would allow her to support herself and Grace without relying on anyone else's promises. How was your first day? Rebecca asked, as Lydia returned from work, still wearing the professional attire that marked her return to the working world. Challenging but good, Lydia replied, reaching for Grace, who babbled happily at the sight of her mother. The team is young and energetic, and they're very understanding about flexible schedules for single parents. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was thriving at a company whose name she recognized from Adam's business dealings, the same Morrison Industries that had pulled their account from his partnership contributing to his professional downfall. But rather than feeling vindictive, she felt only a quiet satisfaction in proving that she could succeed on her own merits. Any word from Adam about the visitation schedule? Henry says he's dealing with some legal issues that might affect the custody arrangements. Something about a police investigation. Lydia shrugged, adjusting Grace against her shoulder. I'm not asking for details. As long as Grace is protected, that's all that matters. That evening, as she fed Grace and reviewed work emails, Lydia felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. The apartment Rebecca had helped her find was small but bright, filled with second-hand furniture, and the kind of homemade decorations that spoke of care rather than expense. It was a life built on necessity rather than luxury, but it was entirely hers. Back in Los Angeles, Adam's lawyer was reviewing the police documents with the grim expression of someone who had seen too many lives destroyed by false accusations. The good news, Jonathan Rivers said, is that her evidence is sloppy. Phone records can be verified, credit card transactions leave digital trails, and workplace security cameras keep footage for 90 days. If she's lying, and it appears she is, we can prove it. And the bad news? The bad news is that even false accusations can destroy what's left of your reputation. Your ex-wife's attorney is already using this investigation to argue that you're unsuitable for unsupervised visitation with your daughter. Adam felt the walls closing in. Every poor choice he had made was creating new consequences, each consequence generating additional problems that seemed to multiply exponentially. Vanessa's desperation had become his crisis, and his crisis was affecting his ability to be a father to Grace. What do? We cooperate fully with the investigation, provide documentation proving your whereabouts during the alleged incidents, and hope that Ms. Moore's lies unravel before they cause permanent damage. That night, Adam sat in his empty house with Grace's photo on his phone, studying his daughter's perfect features and wondering how many more obstacles would stand between them before she was old enough to understand that her father had never stopped loving her, even if he had destroyed everything else in his pursuit of a fantasy. In Phoenix, Vanessa was learning that desperation made people reckless. She spent the evening creating fake email accounts and sending herself threatening messages that she backdated to support her timeline. Each fabrication required another, each lie demanding additional lies to maintain the illusion. But lies, she was discovering, were like house of cards, impressive when carefully constructed, catastrophic when they inevitably collapsed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. Need to see you first thing tomorrow. HR has some questions about external legal matters affecting your employment. Vanessa stared at the message, realizing that her attempt to destroy Adam had instead accelerated her own professional demise. The police investigation she had initiated was now creating additional scrutiny of her background, her character, her fitness for employment. She had gambled everything on the hope that destroying Adam completely would somehow restore her own prospects. Instead, she had only succeeded in dragging herself deeper into a hole that was becoming impossible to escape. In San Diego, Lydia kissed Grace goodnight and settled into the rocking chair by the window, watching the peaceful neighborhood where families lived ordinary lives built on honest foundations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, work deadlines, baby care, the endless juggling act of single parenthood. But tonight, she felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that everything she had was earned through her own efforts and integrity. She thought briefly of Adam, wondered if he truly understood how much he had lost, not just in practical terms but in the destruction of trust that could never be fully repaired. But the thought passed quickly, replaced by gratitude for the life she was building. Small perhaps, but genuine in ways that luxury purchased through deception could never be. Outside her window, the San Diego evening was gentle and warm, filled with the sounds of a world where people kept their promises and built their lives on foundations that would last. The unraveling began with a single phone call that Vanessa had been dreading for 3 days. She sat in her cramped Phoenix apartment, staring at Detective Kim's number on her phone screen, knowing that answering would likely seal her fate, but that not answering would only delay the inevitable. Ms. Moore, we've completed our preliminary investigation into your allegations against Mr. Collins. Vanessa's grip tightened on the phone. And we've discovered several discrepancies in your timeline. The phone records you provided don't match the carrier's logs. The credit card transactions for the alleged gifts trace back to accounts that have never been associated with Mr. Collins. And most significantly, the security footage from your Phoenix office building shows no delivery personnel on the dates you specified. The words hit Vanessa like a series of physical blows. In her desperation to construct a believable narrative, She had underestimated the thoroughness of a police investigation and the digital trail that modern life inevitably created. There must be some mistake, she stammered. But even as she spoke, she could hear the futility in her own voice. Ms. Moore, filing a false police report is a felony in both California and Arizona. Given that your allegations crossed state lines, federal prosecutors may also become involved. I need you to understand the seriousness of your situation. The call ended with instructions for Vanessa to retain legal counsel and report to the Phoenix Police Department within 48 hours. She sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the modest furniture that represented the life she had tried so desperately to elevate, and faced the reality that her ambition had finally led her to criminal territory. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. Please clean out your desk and surrender your company equipment by end of business today. Security will escort you from the building. Vanessa stared at the message, realizing that her employment, already reduced to a fraction of its former status, was now completely eliminated. The police investigation she had initiated to save her career had instead destroyed the last remnants of her professional life. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Adam received the call he had been hoping for but dreading the implications of. Mr. Collins, this is Detective Kim. The investigation into Ms. Moore's allegations has concluded. All charges against you have been dropped, and we'll be pursuing charges against Ms. Moore for filing false reports. Adam felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Thank you, Detective. What happens now? We'll need a statement from you for the prosecution's case against Ms. Moore, but otherwise you're free to resume your normal activities. Normal activities? Adam almost laughed at the phrase. His marriage was over, his business partnership dissolved, his reputation permanently damaged, and his relationship with his daughter reduced to supervised visits in institutional settings. There was nothing normal left to resume. But the legal cloud that had been hanging over him was lifting, and that meant he could at least fight for more time with Grace without the specter of stalking charges undermining his case. In San Diego, Lydia was experiencing the quiet satisfaction of a life built on sustainable foundations. Grace, now 2 months old, had settled into a routine that allowed Lydia to excel at her new job while maintaining the kind of present, attentive motherhood she had always envisioned. She's sleeping through the night now, Lydia told Rebecca as they walked through Balboa Park, Grace content in her stroller as they enjoyed the mild December afternoon. 6 hours straight. It's like having a new lease on life. And work is going well? Better than I expected. They've already talked about promoting me to senior project coordinator. Apparently, having someone who can actually manage complex timelines without drama is rarer than they thought. Rebecca smiled at the subtle dig at Adam's chaotic management style, but she could see that Lydia's comment came from a place of confidence rather than bitterness. Her sister had transformed from a woman who defined herself through her relationship to someone who had discovered her own professional competence and personal strength. Any word from Henry about the custody situation? The police investigation against Adam was dropped. Apparently, Vanessa made the whole thing up. Lydia's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. Henry says this might actually help with establishing a more normal visitation schedule. How do you feel about that? Lydia was quiet for a moment, watching Grace's peaceful face as the stroller moved along the path. I want Grace to know her father, even if I can't forgive what he did to us. Children deserve relationships with both parents when it's safe and healthy. But Adam has to prove that he's stable, that he's learned from his mistakes, that he can be the kind of father Grace deserves. The conversation was interrupted by Lydia's phone ringing. Henry Dawson's office. Lydia, I have some interesting news. Adam's legal team has requested a meeting to discuss modifying the custody arrangement. With the criminal charges dropped, they're pushing for unsupervised visitation. What do you think? I think we should meet with them, but with conditions. Adam needs to demonstrate stability, consistent housing, steady employment, completion of co-parenting classes. We're not going to hand over unsupervised access to Grace just because some false charges were dropped. That evening, Adam sat in his lawyer's office reviewing the proposed custody modification with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The good news, Jonathan Rivers explained, is that the false charges being dropped strengthens your position considerably. The bad news is that your ex-wife's attorney is going to require proof of stability that goes beyond just clearing your name. What kind of proof? Steady employment for starters. The business partnership dissolution and the damaged reputation have left you effectively unemployed. You'll need to demonstrate that you can provide financial stability for your daughter. Adam nodded, though the employment situation felt like an insurmountable obstacle. His reputation in Los Angeles business circles was permanently tainted, and starting over would require not just finding a new career but rebuilding credibility from the ground up. "There's something else," Rivers continued. "Co-parenting classes. Your ex-wife's team is insisting that you complete a court-approved program on post-divorce parenting before any unsupervised visitation begins." The requirement stung, the implication that he needed to be taught how to be a father to his own child. But Adam understood the logic. His choices had demonstrated such poor judgment that even basic parenting competence was now in question. In Phoenix, Vanessa met with a public defender in a dingy office that smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams. The lawyer, a tired-looking woman named Janet Rodriguez, reviewed the charges with the weary efficiency of someone who had seen too many lives destroyed by poor decisions. "The good news is that this is your first offense," Rodriguez said. "The bad news is that filing false reports across state lines makes this a federal matter. The prosecution is likely to push for jail time to deter others from wasting law enforcement resources." Vanessa stared at the legal documents, unable to fully process that her life had deteriorated to the point where she was facing potential incarceration. 6 months ago, she had been a rising marketing executive with ambitious plans and unlimited confidence. Now she was unemployed, facing felony charges, and living in an apartment she could barely afford. "What are my options?" "Plea bargain, most likely. Admit guilt, accept probation and community service, possibly some jail time. Fight it in court and risk a harsher sentence if you lose." The choice felt like no choice at all, an acknowledgement that her attempts to destroy Adam had instead destroyed herself, completely and irreversibly. Back in San Diego, Lydia tucked Grace into her crib and stood for a moment watching her daughter sleep. The nursery was simple but cheerful, decorated with hand-painted murals that Rebecca had helped create and filled with books and toys that spoke of a childhood that would be rich in love, even if it wasn't lavish in material possessions. She thought about the conversation with Henry, about the possibility of Adam earning more time with Grace, about the complicated process of co-parenting with someone who had shattered her trust so completely. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. Her phone buzzed with a text from her new colleague. "Great work on the Morrison presentation today." The client was really impressed. Lydia smiled, feeling the quiet satisfaction of recognition earned through competence and integrity. She had built this life, modest but stable, challenging but manageable through her own efforts. Whatever happened with custody arrangements or legal proceedings, she knew that she and Grace would be okay. Outside her window, the San Diego evening was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of a neighborhood where people had built their lives on honest foundations that would weather whatever storms the future might bring. In Los Angeles and Phoenix, two people who had gambled everything on deception were learning that lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually collapsed under the weight of their own contradictions. But in San Diego, a mother and daughter slept peacefully, surrounded by the kind of love that no amount of money or status could buy, and no amount of betrayal could ultimately destroy. 6 months after Grace's birth, the courthouse in Phoenix resembled a theater where the final act of Vanessa's downfall would be performed. She sat beside her public defender, Janet Rodriguez, wearing the only professional outfit she still owned, a navy blue suit that had once made her feel powerful, but now felt like a costume from a life she barely remembered. Judge Elena Santos reviewed the case file with the methodical attention of someone who had seen too many lives destroyed by poor choices. The courtroom was nearly empty except for a court reporter, a few legal observers, and a prosecutor who had handled dozens of similar cases. "Ms. Moore," Judge Santos said, looking up from the documents, "you've pled guilty to filing false police reports across state lines, misuse of federal law enforcement resources, and perjury. Do you understand the serious nature of these charges?" "Yes, Your Honor," Vanessa replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman who had once commanded marketing meetings with authoritative confidence now struggled to project her voice in a room where her future would be decided. "The prosecution is recommending 18 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and community service. Given that this is your first offense and you've shown remorse by pleading guilty, I'm inclined to consider the recommendation. However, I want you to understand something, Ms. Moore." Vanessa looked up, meeting the judge's steady gaze. "Your actions didn't just waste law enforcement resources or damage Mr. Collins's reputation. You undermined the credibility of genuine victims of harassment and stalking. When women with real concerns come forward, Your false allegations make it harder for them to be believed. That's a responsibility you'll carry for the rest of your life." The sentence was delivered with clinical precision. 14 months in federal prison, 2 years of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution for the cost of the multi-state investigation. Vanessa listened to the words that would define the next phase of her life, understanding that the ambitious woman she had once been was as dead as if she had never existed. As the bailiff approached to begin the process of remanding her into custody, Vanessa thought about the penthouse apartment where this nightmare had begun, about the wine and promises and calculated seduction that had seemed so sophisticated at the time. All of it had led to this moment, sitting in handcuffs in a Phoenix courtroom, watching the last remnants of her freedom disappear. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, Adam was experiencing his own form of reckoning, though his took place in the fluorescent-lit classroom of a community center rather than a courthouse. The co-parenting class that Henry Dawson had insisted upon was filled with other divorced parents, learning to navigate the complicated terrain of shared custody and failed marriages. "Remember," the instructor, Dr. I. Jennifer Walsh, said as she addressed the group, "your relationship with your co-parent is separate from your relationship with your child. Your job is to prioritize your child's emotional well-being, even when that means working with someone you'd rather avoid." Adam listened to the lecture while studying his fellow classmates, men and women whose lives had been upended by divorce, who were trying to figure out how to love their children while managing the wreckage of broken promises. Some of them looked angry, others defeated. A few seemed to have found a kind of peace in accepting their new reality. "Mr. Collins," Dr. Walsh said, "you mentioned in your intake form that your daughter is still an infant. How do you plan to build a meaningful relationship with her given the current custody restrictions?" The question forced Adam to articulate something he had been struggling with for months. I think I need to focus on becoming the kind of man she can be proud of, rather than just demanding more time with her. I made choices that proved I wasn't reliable. I need to demonstrate that I've learned from those mistakes." It was the first time Adam had spoken publicly about his situation without making excuses or shifting blame. The admission felt both liberating and terrifying, an acknowledgement that rebuilding his life would require fundamental changes rather than just better circumstances. After class, Adam drove to the small apartment he had rented in Culver City, a modest 2-bedroom unit that represented a dramatic downsizing from the Pasadena house he had shared with Lydia. But it was clean, stable, and suitable for overnight visits with Grace once he completed the requirements for unsupervised custody. His phone rang as he unlocked his front door. Jonathan Rivers, his attorney. "Adam, I have news about Vanessa Moore. She was sentenced today. 14 months in federal prison. The false allegations case is completely closed." Adam felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the nightmare was over, sadness that someone he had once cared about had destroyed herself so completely, and guilt that his own poor choices had set the chain of events in motion. What does this mean for the custody situation? It removes the last obstacle to requesting unsupervised visitation. Combined with your completion of the co-parenting classes and your new stable housing, we should be able to petition for overnight visits within the next few months. In San Diego, Lydia was experiencing the kind of professional recognition she had never imagined possible during her years as a stay-at-home wife. She stood in the conference room at Morrison Digital Marketing, presenting the quarterly results that had exceeded every expectation and positioned her for a promotion to senior project manager. The client retention rate for Lydia's accounts is running at 94%. Her supervisor, David Chen, announced to the team. "That's the highest in the company's history." Lydia accepted the congratulations with quiet confidence, understanding that her success came from the same qualities that had made her a good wife and would make her a good mother: attention to detail, genuine care for people's needs, and the ability to keep promises even when circumstances became difficult. After the meeting, she checked her phone and found a text from Rebecca. "Grace said mama today, 3 times. She's been practicing for you." The news filled Lydia with the kind of joy that no professional achievement could match. At 7 months old, Grace was reaching the milestones that marked her development from helpless infant to small person with opinions and preferences. Lydia had been documenting every moment. First smiles, first attempts at solid food, the way Grace's eyes lit up when she heard music. That evening, as Lydia fed Grace dinner and listened to her daughter's increasingly complex babbling, she reflected on how much their lives had changed since that cold December morning when Grace had been born. They had settled into rhythms that felt natural and sustainable, work that challenged her, childcare that she trusted, an apartment that felt like home rather than just temporary shelter. "Your daddy wants to see you more often," she told Grace, who was enthusiastically smearing sweet potato across her high chair tray. "We're going to have to figure out how to share you, little one." The thought still caused a knot of anxiety in her chest. Co-parenting with Adam would require a level of trust she wasn't sure she could rebuild. Communication with someone who had lied to her for months, shared decision-making with a man whose judgment she had learned to question. But watching Grace's delighted reaction to peekaboo games and silly songs, Lydia knew that her daughter deserved the chance to know her father, if he could prove himself worthy of that trust. Her phone buzzed with a call from Henry Dawson. "Lydia, Adam's attorney has submitted a formal request for overnight visitation. He's completed the co-parenting classes, secured stable housing, and the criminal charges against him have been definitively resolved. What do you recommend?" "I think we agree to a gradual transition. Extended daytime visits first, then overnight stays once we're satisfied that he can handle the responsibility. Grace deserves to know her father, but only if he's truly committed to being the parent she needs." That night, after Grace was asleep, Lydia sat in her small living room and thought about the woman she had been 18 months earlier. Trusting, financially dependent, willing to make excuses for behavior that should have raised red flags. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone she remembered fondly but could never become again. The Lydia who existed now was someone who had learned to trust her own judgment, who had discovered professional competence she never knew she possessed, who had built a life that no one could take away through betrayal or deception. She looked at the framed photo on her end table, herself and Grace at the beach last weekend, both of them laughing at something Rebecca had said, the ocean stretching endlessly behind them. It was a picture of two people who had survived abandonment and emerged stronger, who had learned that love built on honest foundations was worth more than comfort purchased through compromise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, work deadlines, custody negotiations, the endless balancing act of single parenthood. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life built through her own efforts, Lydia felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that whatever came next, she and Grace would face it together, from a position of strength rather than dependence. In a federal holding facility in Phoenix, Vanessa lay on a narrow bunk and stared at the ceiling, calculating how many days remained until her release. In Los Angeles, Adam sat in his modest apartment, planning how to create a space where his daughter would feel loved and secure during their time together. But in San Diego, a mother and daughter slept peacefully, their lives no longer defined by what had been taken from them, but by what they had built in its place. 1 year after Grace's birth, the family court in San Diego buzzed with the routine business of broken families trying to reconstruct themselves into something functional. Lydia sat beside Henry Dawson, watching Adam enter the courtroom with his attorney, noting how much he had changed in the months since their separation. The man who walked through those doors was leaner, quieter, carrying himself with less of the entitled confidence that had once defined him. His suit was off the rack rather than custom-tailored, his entire appearance suggesting someone who had learned to live within more modest means, and perhaps found some measure of peace in that reduction. Judge Maria Rodriguez reviewed the case file with the methodical attention of someone who had overseen hundreds of custody arrangements. "Mr. Collins, you've completed the required co-parenting education, maintained stable housing for 6 months, and demonstrated consistent employment. The reports from your supervised visitations have been uniformly positive." Adam nodded, his hands folded carefully in his lap. "Thank you, Your Honor. Being with my daughter, even for limited time, has been the most important part of rebuilding my life." "Mrs. Collins," the judge turned to Lydia, "you've indicated willingness to expand Mr. Collins's visitation rights to include overnight stays on weekends, with certain conditions." Lydia stood, Grace sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the courthouse commotion. At 1 year old, Grace had grown into a cheerful, curious toddler who babbled constantly and had recently taken her first wobbling steps. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe Grace should know her father, and he's shown that he's committed to being a responsible parent. But I'd like the arrangement to start gradually." The judge outlined the new custody schedule. Every other weekend, with Adam picking up Grace on Saturday morning and returning her Sunday evening. Holiday arrangements would be shared, with flexibility built in for Grace's needs as she grew older. As they left the courthouse, Adam and Lydia found themselves walking in the same direction toward the parking garage, the first time they had been alone together since the day she had left their marriage. Lydia, Adam said quietly, adjusting his pace to match hers. I know I don't have the right to ask, but how are you? Really? She looked at him. This man who had been her partner for 5 years, the father of her child, the person who had broken her heart so thoroughly that she had to rebuild her entire life from scratch. What she saw was someone who seemed genuinely changed, humbled by consequences that had stripped away the arrogance that had made betrayal possible. I'm good, she said, and meant it. Better than I've been in a long time. I'm glad. You look happy, confident. He paused, struggling with words. I'm sorry, Lydia, for all of it, for what I put you through, for missing Grace's birth, for forcing you to start over alone. I know saying it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know. Lydia shifted Grace to her other arm, studying Adam's face for signs of the manipulation that had once come so easily to him. What she saw instead was exhaustion, genuine remorse, and something that might have been the beginning of wisdom. Thank you for saying that, she replied. And Adam, Grace deserves the best version of you. Don't let her down. They parted ways in the parking garage. Two people who had once shared everything now navigating the complicated terrain of co-parenting with someone they no longer trusted but couldn't entirely dismiss. 6 months later, Lydia stood in the corner office that had come with her promotion to senior project manager, looking out over the San Diego harbor where sailboats dotted the water like scattered thoughts. Her assistant knocked on the open door. Mrs. Collins? The Morrison Industries executives are here for the quarterly review. Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there. The irony still wasn't lost on her that she was now leading projects for the same company that had pulled their business from Adam's partnership, contributing to his professional downfall. But rather than feeling vindictive, she felt only professional satisfaction in work that challenged her abilities and recognized her contributions. The meeting went better than expected. Morrison Industries was expanding their West Coast operations and wanted Lydia's team to handle the entire digital marketing transition. It was the kind of career opportunity she had never imagined when she was planning dinner menus and organizing Adam's social calendar. Congratulations, David Chen said after the clients left. This is the biggest account in the company's history, and they specifically requested you as the lead. That evening, Lydia picked up Grace from daycare and headed home to the small house she had recently purchased. Nothing grand, but entirely hers, with a yard where Grace could play and a mortgage she could afford on her own salary. Grace, now 18 months old, chattered constantly as they prepared dinner together, her vocabulary expanding daily to include new words like cookie and puppy and daddy, a development that still caused Lydia's chest to tighten with complicated emotions. Adam's weekend visits had settled into a routine that worked for everyone. He would arrive precisely on time, equipped with age-appropriate activities and endless patience for Grace's boundless energy. When he returned her on Sunday evenings, Grace was always clean, fed, and happy, chattering about parks and picture books and the small adventures that had filled their time together. How was your weekend with Daddy? Lydia asked as she gave Grace her bath. Park, Grace announced triumphantly. Swings. Hi. It was a simple conversation, but it represented something Lydia had never expected to achieve. A co-parenting relationship that prioritized Grace's happiness over the adult's complicated history. Meanwhile, in a federal re-entry facility in Phoenix, Vanessa Moore was completing her sentence with the quiet desperation of someone whose future held no clear path forward. The marketing skills that had once opened doors were now overshadowed by a criminal record that made employment in her chosen field nearly impossible. She worked in the facility's laundry, earning $2 per hour while completing the community service hours that would be required after her release. Her fellow inmates were mostly women whose lives had been derailed by poor choices, drug offenses, white-collar crimes, acts of desperation that had seemed reasonable in the moment but proved catastrophically destructive in hindsight. What you gonna do when you get out? Asked Maria, a woman serving time for embezzlement who had become Vanessa's closest friend among the inmates. I don't know, Vanessa admitted. Start over, I guess. Maybe somewhere no one knows what I did. But starting over required resources Vanessa no longer possessed. Her savings had been depleted by legal fees, her professional reputation was destroyed, and her ambition, the driving force that had once defined her, had been replaced by a weary acceptance of diminished circumstances. 6 months after her release, Vanessa worked as a night shift customer service representative for an online retailer, fielding complaints from customers she would never meet about products she had never seen. It was honest work, but it paid barely enough to cover rent on a studio apartment in a part of Phoenix where ambition went to die. She thought often about the choices that had led her here, the calculation that had made Adam seem like a worthwhile investment, the lies that had compounded until they consumed everything, the desperation that had driven her to criminal behavior. Each poor decision had seemed logical at the time, but together they had created a trajectory that ended in professional exile and personal isolation. In Los Angeles, Adam had settled into a life that was smaller, but more honest than anything he had built during his marriage. He worked as a project manager for a mid-sized construction company, steady work that paid well enough to support his modest lifestyle and provide consistent child support for Grace. His weekends with his daughter had become the anchor of his existence. He had learned to braid her hair, to negotiate the complicated preferences of a toddler who wanted to wear her Halloween costume to the grocery store, to read the same picture book 17 times in a row because Grace found the rhyming words endlessly hilarious. "Daddy, more," Grace would demand, and Adam would begin again, marveling at the way fatherhood had taught him patience he never knew he possessed. He dated occasionally, but those relationships never developed into anything serious. Part of him was still processing the wreckage of his marriage, still learning to trust his own judgment about people and relationships. But mostly, he was content to focus on being the kind of father Grace deserved, reliable, present, honest in ways he had failed to be as a husband. On this particular Sunday evening, as he prepared to return Grace to Lydia, Adam found himself reflecting on the strange mathematics of consequences. He had lost everything he thought he wanted: the prestigious career, the expensive lifestyle, the excitement of an affair that had made him feel young and desired. In return, he had gained something he hadn't known he needed: the ability to be genuinely proud of the man he was becoming. Grace fell asleep in her car seat during the drive back to San Diego, her small hand clutching the stuffed elephant Adam had bought her during their day at the zoo. Watching her in the rearview mirror, Adam felt the kind of love that transcended regret, pure, protective, unconditional in ways that his feelings for Vanessa had never been. When they arrived at Lydia's house, she was waiting on the front porch reading a book in the golden hour light that made everything in San Diego look like a postcard. She looked up as Adam's car pulled into the driveway, and for a moment, they were just two parents sharing the responsibility of caring for someone they both loved more than their own lives. "How was she?" Lydia asked as Adam carried the sleeping Grace toward the house. "Perfect," Adam replied, and meant it. "She learned to say elephant today." "Well, effant. Close enough," Lydia smiled, a genuine expression of shared joy in their daughter's development. It was the kind of moment Adam had never appreciated during their marriage, when such interactions had seemed routine rather than precious. "Thank you," Lydia said as Adam transferred Grace to her arms, "for being the father she needs." Driving back to Los Angeles, Adam reflected on how much had changed since that terrible morning when he had found Lydia's wedding ring on his pillow. He had lost a wife and gained an ex-wife, lost a business and gained honest work, lost the illusion of having it all and gained the reality of having enough. In her house in San Diego, Lydia tucked Grace into her crib and stood for a moment watching her daughter sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: client presentations, daycare drop-offs, the endless juggling act of single parenthood. But tonight, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life built through her own efforts, Lydia felt the deep satisfaction of knowing that whatever came next, she and Grace would face it from a position of strength. She had learned that dignity wasn't something that could be taken away by betrayal. It was something that could only be surrendered, and she had chosen to keep hers, to build a life that honored the love she felt for her daughter and the respect she had learned to feel for herself. Outside her window, the San Diego evening was warm and peaceful, filled with the sounds of a neighborhood where people kept their promises and built their lives on foundations that would last. In Phoenix, Vanessa finished another shift answering customer complaints and drove home to her studio apartment, where she would spend another evening alone with the consequences of choices that had seemed so clever at the time. In Los Angeles, Adam sat in his modest apartment, planning activities for next weekend with Grace and marveling at how much joy could be found in the simple act of being a father who kept his promises. And in San Diego, a mother and daughter slept peacefully, their lives no longer defined by what had been taken from them, but by what they had built in its place: love that was honest, security that was earned, and a future that belonged entirely to them. The story that had begun with betrayal had ended with redemption, not for everyone, but for those who had chosen truth over convenience, responsibility over excuses, and love over ambition. In the end, that had made all the difference. 4 years later, the morning sun painted golden streaks across the hardwood floors of Lydia's living room, as 4-year-old Grace Collins carefully arranged her tea party guests, a collection of stuffed animals, dolls, and her favorite teddy bear that Adam had given her for her 3rd birthday. "Mama, tea ready?" Grace announced with the serious authority of someone hosting her first formal gathering. Lydia looked up from her laptop, where she was reviewing the final presentation for Morrison Industries' National Expansion Project, a contract that would establish her as one of the most respected project managers on the West Coast. At 34, she had built a career that exceeded anything she had imagined possible during her years as a dependent spouse. "Coming, sweetheart," she called, closing the laptop and joining Grace on the living room floor. The house around them told the story of a life built deliberately and with care. Family photos lined the mantelpiece, Grace's first steps, birthday parties with Rebecca's family, quiet moments of a mother and daughter who had learned to find joy in simple things. The furniture was comfortable rather than expensive, chosen for durability and function rather than status. "Mrs. Bear says thank you for the cookies," Grace informed her solemnly, holding up a stuffed animal that had seen better days but remained her constant companion. "Tell Mrs. Bear she's very welcome," Lydia replied, marveling at how her daughter had inherited her father's serious expression, but combined it with a gentleness that was entirely her own. The doorbell rang, and Grace's face lit up with anticipation. "Daddy!" Adam stood on the front porch holding a small bouquet of daisies, Grace's favorite flowers, and wearing the patient smile that had become his defining characteristic during their weekend visits. At 39, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to find satisfaction in simpler pleasures. "Good morning, Grace," he said, kneeling to accept her enthusiastic hug. "Ready for our adventure?" They had planned a trip to the Children's Museum, followed by lunch at the park where Grace could feed the ducks, and Adam could watch his daughter discover the world with the fearless curiosity that reminded him daily of what truly mattered. "Bye, Mama," Grace called, already reaching for Adam's hand with the absolute trust that children reserve for parents who have proven themselves reliable. As Lydia watched them walk toward Adam's modest sedan, a practical car chosen for safety rather than status, she felt the complex mixture of emotions that had become familiar over the years. Gratitude that Grace had a father who showed up consistently and with genuine love. Sadness for the family they might have been if Adam had made different choices, and peace with the life they had all built from the wreckage of broken promises. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Dinner tonight? The kids miss their Aunt Lydia." Lydia smiled, typing back, "Absolutely, I'll bring dessert." The support system she had built extended far beyond blood relations. Rebecca's family had become Grace's surrogate grandparents and cousins. Her colleagues at Morrison had evolved from professional acquaintances into genuine friends. Her life was rich with connections built on mutual respect and shared values, rather than legal obligations or social convenience. Later that evening, as Grace played with Rebecca's children in the backyard, Lydia sat on the patio with her sister, watching the sunset paint the San Diego sky in shades of pink and gold. "Any regrets?" Rebecca asked quietly, a question she posed periodically as a way of checking her sister's emotional temperature. Lydia considered the question seriously, as she always did. "About the marriage ending? No. About giving Grace a father who will always be part of our lives in limited ways? Sometimes. But then I watch them together, and I know she's lucky to have him in the capacity he can handle. And Adam? How is he doing? Stable. Reliable. He shows up when he says he will. Does what he promises to do. He's not the man I married. He's someone different. Humbler, maybe. More honest about his limitations." In Los Angeles, Adam was indeed living a life defined by those very qualities. His apartment was small but comfortable, decorated with Grace's artwork and photos from their weekend adventures. His job in construction management paid well enough to support his modest lifestyle and provide consistent support for Grace's needs. He had tried dating over the years, but those relationships never progressed beyond casual companionship. Part of him was still processing the man he had been during his marriage, the entitlement, the selfishness, the willingness to risk everything for temporary excitement. He had no desire to repeat those patterns, and building new trust required a level of self-awareness he was still developing. His social circle was small but genuine. Colleagues who respected his work ethic, neighbors who appreciated his willingness to help with practical tasks, other divorced fathers he had met in co-parenting support groups. It was a quieter life than the one he had known during his marriage, but it was authentic in ways that his previous existence had never been. On this particular Sunday evening, as he drove Grace back to San Diego, she fell asleep in her car seat, clutching the small succulent they had planted together at the Children's Museum, a project that would teach her about responsibility and growth. "Daddy, look," she had said as they carefully placed the tiny plant in its colorful pot. "We made something." The simple joy in her voice had nearly brought him to tears. This was what he had thrown away for 6 months of calculated excitement with Vanessa, the daily miracle of watching his child discover the world, the privilege of being trusted with someone's unconditional love. When they arrived at Lydia's house, she was waiting on the porch with a cup of tea, reading a book about sustainable business practices, always expanding her professional knowledge, always preparing for the next challenge. "How was the museum?" she asked as Adam carried the sleepy Grace toward the house. "Educational," Adam replied with a smile. "We learned about photosynthesis and made a new friend." He gestured to the succulent in Grace's small hands. "Perfect. She can put it on her windowsill." These brief exchanges had become comfortable over the years. Two people who had shared the most intimate aspects of life, but now related to each other primarily as co-parents, with a shared investment in Grace's happiness. As Adam drove back to Los Angeles, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this place. He had lost a marriage, a business, a lifestyle that had once seemed essential to his identity. In return, he had gained something more valuable, the ability to be genuinely proud of the man he was becoming, the satisfaction of earning his daughter's love through consistency rather than grand gestures. Meanwhile, 200 miles away in Phoenix, Vanessa Moore finished another shift at the call center where she had worked for nearly 2 years. At 31, she looked older than her years, worn down by the grinding reality of rebuilding a life from nothing. Her studio apartment was clean but sparse, furnished with items from thrift stores and garage sales, decorated with nothing that spoke of personal history or future aspirations. The ambition that had once driven her had been replaced by a weary focus on basic survival. She thought often about the choices that had led her here, particularly during the long hours when she fielded customer complaints from people whose problems seemed manageable compared to the destruction she had brought upon herself. The federal conviction had made employment in marketing impossible. The lies she had told had destroyed any credibility she might have rebuilt. Occasionally, she would Google Adam's name or search for news about Lydia's company, following the lives she had helped to destroy from a distance. She had learned that Adam was working in construction, that Lydia had been promoted multiple times and was now considered one of the rising stars in her field. The information filled her with a complicated mixture of envy and regret, not for their happiness, but for the person she might have been if she had chosen differently. On this particular evening, she sat in her small apartment and drafted another job application, this time for a position in data entry that paid slightly more than customer service, but required no creativity, no strategic thinking, no use of the skills that had once made her feel valuable and important. She had learned that consequences weren't always temporary, that some choices created permanent changes in the trajectory of a life. The woman who had once believed she could manipulate her way to success had discovered that lies eventually consumed the liar, leaving nothing but the hollow shell of reduced circumstances and permanent isolation. But in San Diego, as Lydia tucked Grace into bed and read her favorite story about a brave little mouse who learned to be kind to others, a different kind of lesson was being absorbed. "Mama," Grace said sleepily. "The mouse was mean first, but then she was nice." "That's right, sweetheart. People can choose to be better. That's what makes them grown up." "Will I be a good grown-up?" Lydia smoothed her daughter's hair and kissed her forehead. "You already are good, Grace. You're kind and honest and brave. Just keep being yourself." As Grace drifted off to sleep, Lydia sat in the rocking chair by the window and reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. The woman who had once defined herself through her marriage had discovered that identity built on external validation was fragile, while identity built on personal integrity was unshakable. She had learned that love without respect was unsustainable, that security built on lies was illusory, that the courage to start over was the most valuable skill anyone could develop. Most importantly, she had learned that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, professionally, personally, and as a mother. The life she had built wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Grace would grow up understanding that people who kept their promises could be trusted, that work done with integrity created lasting satisfaction, that love given freely was returned in abundance. Outside her window, the San Diego evening was soft and warm, filled with the sounds of families gathering for dinner, children playing in yards, couples walking dogs along tree-lined streets. It was the ordinary magic of people who had built their lives on sustainable foundations, who had learned that happiness came not from having everything, but from appreciating what was real. In 3 different cities, 3 people who had once shared an intimate connection now lived entirely separate lives, shaped by the choices they had made during those crucial months when grace was still just a hope rather than a reality. One had chosen deception and had reaped isolation. One had chosen redemption and had found limited but genuine peace. One had chosen survival and had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. And in the middle of it all, a 4-year-old girl slept peacefully, surrounded by love that was honest, security that was earned, and a future that would be built on the foundation of lessons her mother had learned through betrayal and her father had learned through loss. The story that had begun with a wedding ring left on a pillow had become something larger, a testament to the truth that consequences, both beautiful and terrible, flow from every choice we make, creating ripples that extend far beyond our ability to predict or control. But for those who choose wisely, who learn from their mistakes, who prioritize love over ambition and truth over convenience, those ripples eventually create something beautiful, a life that can withstand any storm because it is built on foundations that will last. In the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. After following Lydia, Adam, and Vanessa's entire journey throughout these chapters, one question remains. If you were Lydia at the moment you discovered Adam's betrayal and knew in advance all the consequences that your choices would bring, both for you and for him and Vanessa, would you still make the same decision she did? I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.